Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. Blinken came to China. He behaved himself and he got to meet the people he wanted to meet. There wasn't anything fixed or even finalized about the meeting until they happened, but nothing was really expected. The main purpose, as Blinken admitted, was to open high-level dialogue. By all accounts, the meetings were cordial. They didn't need to be. China could have called them off. It could have provided instant noodles for meals or declined to escalate to presidential level. They didn't do any of those things. And in the meetings, Blinken showed deference to them, but then reverted to type and joined his president shortly after the meetings in insulting his hosts. Apart from the fact that China willingly accepted Blinken's uninvited visit, two important future steps were confirmed. One was dialogue would be maintained, and the other was that Qinggang would visit Washington later in the year. The biggest disappointment for most observers on the day was Blinken's press briefing in the US Embassy shortly after his meeting with Xi Jinping. He inferred that he had been in command of the dialogue and that he had told China what the expectations were. He said that he had mentioned challenges, human rights in Xinjiang, democracy in Hong Kong, and threats to Taiwan, which, had he actually mentioned these as anything other than concerns, his meeting with Wang Yi and the follow-up meeting with the President of China would almost certainly not have happened. Whilst delivering these messages in the press briefing, there was some very unusual body language from Blinken. Experienced watchers will be aware that Blinken is a good speaker. He approaches podiums confidently, he delivers well, but this time he didn't. He couldn't stand still. He read extensively from notes, which is not something he usually does. It's possible he may have needed a toilet, but it's also possible that he wasn't being forthright and he knew he would be critically assessed by his counterparts, accounting for his body language. His comments about the rules-based order, safeguarding peace and global security for years, may very well have been appreciated by the international community, but would have raised a sarcastic comment or two from much of the developing world, the world we've come to know as the global south. Peace and security that Blinken speaks so glibly of seem to have eluded most of the global south. Blinken spoke of challenges and asked for China's help with the Ukrainian conflict and the DPRK, both of which would be sensible. He reiterated that the one China policy has not changed, but then went on to state that USA would continue to ensure Taiwan has the ability to defend itself. From who? This is a clear change from and a direct contradiction of the Shanghai Joint Communique of 1972, in which the USA agreed to remove its military and stop assisting Taiwan militarily. Blinken's justification for this, unsurprisingly, is not the three joint communiques, nor the many promises, both verbal and in writing, given by Nixon and other presidents, including Jimmy Carter, but it's a piece of US unilateral legislation called the Taiwan Relations Act. He commented on areas of mutual interest and the desire the US has to cooperate, but these include climate, something China has done far more about than the US, macroeconomic stability, something that is a risk for the US far more than it is for China as more countries look to de-dollarize, food security, something China is criticized for as it attempts to become self-sufficient in this vital field, and fentanyl, which is a problem the USA keeps passing on to China as China's fault. An alcoholic who tries to blame the shop for his problem would be laughed at. USA is no exception. They have systemic problems with massive substance abusers and are happier to blame China than they are to consider their own societal problems, which appear to be a much greater cause for concern. One of the real reasons Blinken was in China, as he said, was not to achieve specific results, but to reopen high-level dialogue, so that future results might be found. Climate Envoy John Kerry, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen are all looking for invites. Kerry was in China in 2021, and apart from Blinken, is the only senior executive of the Biden administration to have achieved this feat, recently anyway. There is more work to be done in his field, and China is doing this, with or without John Kerry and USA's involvement. Austin is unlikely to get a meeting. His opposite number is still on the US sanction lists for the offence of doing his job and purchasing Russian equipment while he was the senior purchasing officer of the People's Liberation Army. Until that sanction is lifted or even exempted, no meeting will or even legally can take place. The big one is Treasury. The USA has recently printed more dollars and hopes more countries will absorb their debt. China is currently divesting itself of US debt and has reduced from 1.06 trillion a few years ago to just over 900 billion now. Yellen would clearly love to reverse that trend. The last thing China wants is a US collapse. The market in China has diversified its economy with more in ASEAN, growing in Africa, Latin America, RCEP, but the US is still a major component in China's economy. The best solution China can seek would be to buy more US debt bonds based on proven backsteps in both rhetoric and action. If the US stops selling arms to Taiwan, China buys bonds. If the US pulls NGOs out of Taiwan and Hong Kong, China buys more bonds. If the USA pulls all of its allied ships beyond their island chains of defense, China could buy more. If the US lifts sanctions on Xinjiang, maybe they could buy more. In this way, China would get what it wants, the US could achieve what it needs, and the world would be a better place. Biden went off script again, just a couple of days after Blinken's meeting, and he described his Chinese counterpart as a dictator. But there's more to this story than meets the eye. It was clearly meant as an insult, but it wasn't the win that Biden thinks it might have been. It also clearly indicates that if Biden was on script, which in itself looks unlikely, that the scriptwriters are unaware that the Constitution of China states categorically that China is a democratic dictatorship. Calling Xi Jinping a dictator isn't an insult, it's actually correct. But saying the words intended as an insult is a huge loss of face to the Biden administration. USA needs to do better, and unless they do, it's unlikely China will be any more conciliatory, unless of course it suits China's interests. There doesn't seem to be much incentive for China to offer any more help to an empire in decline, and it clearly doesn't want to accept a helping hand or an extended olive branch. That's the situation in the USA right now. Thank you very much for watching Jerry's Take on China again, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.